Agnolo Bronzino's Venus, Cupid, Folly, and Time was painted in 1546. Agnolo Bronzino was a Mannerist painter, so we're going to be talking about Mannerism this week. His real name was not actually Bronzino, it was Agnolo di Cosimo. Bronzino referred to probably the fact that he had very dark skin. And Mannerism is not an art movement that we've talked about, I don't think at all at this point, at least in the Painting of the Week series. It was a style of late Renaissance art. It sort of formed at the bridge from the Renaissance into the Baroque period, and it emphasizes artifice. So the imagery that we see in Mannerist paintings is contrived. It's not something that's adopted directly from nature. But at the same time, it is much more naturalistic than it is romantic. And we talk about this contrast a lot in art between naturalism and romanticism. Is a painting realistic or is it idealized? And Mannerism is definitely more in the naturalism category. But it has this certain, I would say, self-conscious stylization. It's very complex. It typically involves caprice, fantasy. It's got this sort of polish to it. And it's much more excessive than early Renaissance art. It's more over the top. And particularly, and this is a great example of this, the eroticism is much more explicit. The canvas is a lot more heavily ornamented and stylized, but at the same time it's tempered by this cooler color palette like we see here, lots of creams and whites and blues. And these figures are all painted in the typical Mannerist style, and this is something that's really borrowed from sculpture. We call it the figura serpentinata, which is Latin for kind of like a serpentine, right, or snake figure. And you can see how these figures have been painted in this kind of spiral pose. So the subject matter here, we're looking at Venus and her son, Cupid, and they're engaged in this incestuous embrace. And Venus is readily identifiable here by this golden apple in her left hand, right, which alludes to the judgment of Paris. And then we recognize Cupid by his wings and this jeweled sash with quiver and arrows. But I want to talk a little bit more about Cupid's posture. There's almost something effeminate about it, as if he was making himself overtly available to the viewer. And notice that Venus has plucked one of his arrows with her right hand, and she's holding it above him, which adds this touch of kind of an implicit violence, or perhaps even some sadistic undertones to this painting, which gets back to what I was saying before about in Mannerism, the eroticism being much more explicit and much more direct. Time in this painting, remember the title, Venus, Cupid, Folly, and Time. Time is personified by the eponymous Father Time, which we can identify him by this hourglass that's situated above his right shoulder. And he's attempting to either pull back or maybe lift up this lavender curtain, which is held up on the other side by this kind of grotesque mask-like woman who's usually referred to as Oblivion or Night because of the emptiness of her eyes and her skull. It kind of looks like the back half of her head is completely missing. And that mask imagery is echoed then in the lower right-hand corner of the canvas, where we can see a couple masks have been scattered on the ground. And we're going to talk more about the significance of that in just a minute. But I want to talk specifically about this curtain held up by Oblivion and Time. And it's not clear whether they're working, first of all, against or with each other. And it's also not clear whether they're trying to hide or reveal this scene that's unfolding in front of the viewer. And beneath Oblivion is this screaming old woman, right? She's clawing at her matted hair, and the typical interpretation is to view her as a personification of jealousy or perhaps the ravaging impacts of lust. Now, moving to the right of Venus, we've got this smiling young boy. He's got a fistful of rose petals, and he's holding them alongside his head as if he intends to throw them. And he represents pleasure, or this unabashedly kind of juvenile grin on his face also conveys a sense of foolishness, so he could be associated perhaps with the Folly portion of the title. But it's more difficult to identify figures, right, once we get past Venus, Cupid, and Time. Those are the three obvious ones. But more importantly, behind Folly, or pleasure, is this younger girl, and she has the torso and the lower body of some sort of giant reptile. And she's extending a honeycomb toward Venus and Cupid. So it suggests this kind of deceptive sweetness. for which she's then commonly viewed as a personification of either deceit or fraudulent pleasure, right? She looks deceptively sweet. Then she has this reptilian torso. And also notice that her body is actually contorted into an impossible position such that her hands appear to be switched. So her right hand is on her left arm. And that adds, of course, to the deceitfulness that's associated with her figure. So now that we've identified all the major players here, the meaning of this work, as I said, it's complex in that we can't positively identify what all the figures in this painting actually mean. But what I think is clear here, and this is just my interpretation, is that this painting is about, at its core, desire, both veiled and unveiled. And that, of course, is represented by the drapery that we see held up by time and oblivion, by the masks that I mentioned earlier laying in the bottom right-hand corner of the canvas. Venus and we have Cupid, which are, engaged with one another, but they're surrounded by all these other components of pleasure. You have the screaming old woman, which, as I said, could represent lust or perhaps jealousy. You have sort of this foolish young boy, right, representing folly. And then, of course, you have the deceptive or the deceitful nature of pleasure. So the multifaceted and the multiple components that actually go into happiness and pleasure, I think, is what Bronzino has ultimately attempted to capture here. And the way he's done it with these multiple ambiguities going on, it kind of adds to the confusion that typically, I think, surrounds these types of emotional situations. And then, of course, we have time in the background and night holding up this curtain, or perhaps, as I said, trying to rip it down, and that ambiguity reflecting this kind of dual nature of time. Time as revealing all things, but then, of course, as time passes, these events become confined to the memories of those who have long since passed on. And like a lot of Mannerist pieces, it's very detached from the rest of the world, but this painting is fascinating because it's also detached from itself. We have Cupid and we have Venus. They're locked in their questionable embrace, and they're oblivious to the exterior world, just as this allegory, in a sense, in its bizarreness, is completely oblivious or separated from the rest of the world.